Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. He's a clinical psychologist, and our guest today is Holly Jones. And as she said earlier, she's not addicted to a substance, but you're addicted to work.
Mm-hmm. I think everybody has their own addiction. They just haven't looked close enough at it.
You answered the question before I even asked. I think most people, if you look close into yourself, you are addicted to something.
We are definitely dependent, at least, on a lot of behaviors and substances that we don't consider substances, like sugar, white bread,
cell phone,
and
TV.
And, everybody has some sort of addiction dependency issue going on for sure.
But you wanted to be on the podcast because you grew up with a family of addicts.
I did, yeah.
And tell me a little bit about that.
It's really a strange environment because you're the only one living this life, not understanding what your siblings and your parents are going through, right? You're seeing the enabling. I was the youngest of 4 children. We grew up in a very, I call it my Christopher Robin years because it was just a perfect environment for growing up as a child. Beautiful. So to watch them go through normal traumas in life and then harder traumas and not know and have a coping mechanism to do so.
So let's stop
it's really hard.
Let's stop right there. So normal traumas, just you mean like break up with girlfriend?
Yeah, just normal stuff, lose a job, right?
Yeah.
Get bad grades, all that kind of stuff. But then you actually have big traumas that happen in a family, and we've had a lot.
So did your parents party or was it just your siblings?
Yeah, my parents were hippies, full on hippies. They went through the 70s and 80s. They lived up in Park City. They decided they wanted to move down to a rural environment to raise their family.
Make their own pants?
Yes, yeah. And so they did. They moved down to Spring City. Beautiful environment.
I don't even know where that is. I've lived in Utah my whole life.
It's in Sanpete County. It's really artsy. My dad was an artist.
Spring City, huh? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they moved down there. They switched their lives around. They went to the LDS religion. They got married in the temple. They put all of these things in that they thought they were missing.
That's not very hippie-like, though. That's sort of conservative, right?
Yes, it was. But at the movement, it was kind of...
Is that their rebellion?
No, it was kind of like, oh, look at this new evolution, right? We're evolving.
Right.
And we're evolving as this family, and we are supposed to look a specific way. So we looked a specific way, but then it all started falling apart because they didn't actually deal with what was going on in our family to look the specific way.
No. Okay.
So prior to that, living up in Park City, they embraced more of the traditional hippie lifestyle.
Yes.
So what does that mean when it comes to substance use in your family?
Lots of substance use.
Just across the board, everything?
Alcohol, marijuana?
Mostly it was marijuana, shrooms, a lot of drinking and involved socially. They never, at that point though, they didn't dip one way or the other. They would do it as fun. That's what they did for their social events.
Recreational.
Yes. Yeah. And then they worked. They were able to have their lives. But the thing about recreational is when you hit those trauma points, it's an easy button. It's a, hey, you know what? I know what's going to make me feel better, and this is what I'm going to go to.
So then when they moved down to Spring City, and you said your dad was an artist, did he maintain that part of sort of the hippie lifestyle of being an artist, or did he give that up as well?
Yeah, they bought this awesome house down there. They're very they go back to the roots of their community. So these homes were built in the 1800s, and so everybody tries to keep them very authentic. Okay. So they were fixing up this really old house. All of our friends would come down from Salt Lake because we were living in this amazing area with all this property. So they would come down and put up tents in the backyard, and we'd ride horses, and we had a farm. And
I was going to ask you, probably living off the land, right? Like
they bring down their family to show them, this incredible other way to live other than in the city.
So what do you think was attractive to them about joining a formal religion and being active in a church? What was the draw there?
My mom had always been active with her family. She went wayward when she was about 16, but they were looking for something, I think, to hold them together. They had some
stability.
They had had some issues after they had their first 2 kids, and that's when they decided, you know what, we need to get out of this party phase. We need to get out of the world of, at that time, the 70s. and just recenter ourselves. So my dad went down and he was doing some professor work at Snow College, and he started running their graphic arts department because that was all coming into play at that time. So it was a creative outlet for him, and then also the security that they both needed at that time for their family.
That makes sense.
Now, you say you're the only one in your family that doesn't have a substance abuse problem. Do you remember when your other siblings started taking alcohol or drugs?
Absolutely.
And do you remember, and I guess more curious, why did you say no?
You know, I often said it was hard being the baby of the family, but I got given such a gift in this life because I was able to see each one of them and all of the misfortunes that they had, the good things too, but also when they started using and how it affected that life.
So they gave you a blueprint, basically.
They did. They absolutely did.
You know what we call that?
What?
Vicarious learning.
Oh.
And that is a really valuable type of learning. It means learning by observing. And a lot of people struggle with really learning by observing. They often have to learn through their own specific, successes or mistakes.
So let me stop you there. So I had to touch the pot on the stove to tell it was hot.
Yeah, low on vicarious
I
learning.
watched you and said, oh,
Yeah, there you go. So that's interesting. It also tells me just a little bit about your own cognitive makeup and what you tune into, and the fact that you're an internal processor and you see a lot of things and observe and try to make sense of things in your environment. And so you're right. As the youngest, that is a gift, because if that's your cognitive setup, then you have the ability to avoid a lot of problems because you can see what other people do incorrectly and avoid doing that.
right. Well, and it also gives you an area in which you see, oh, they don't have any coping mechanisms. So how do I work on what we're missing in our family, right? And I searched a lot of different places, and I have so many family members now that are friends that I consider family because I had to search out for those relationships. I didn't have those within my home. So to search out for those other mentors in life was key for me because I had to have that person say, yeah, that is a coping mechanism. Yes, that's a good thing.
So do you remember an instance or one of the first ones that where somebody offered you some alcohol or some drugs and you went, no, I'm okay? And it was there pressure? Because I feel like there's been a lot of people on this podcast who have been in a social setting who were a little insecure, maybe anxiety ridden, and wasn't sure and didn't have the ability or the coping mechanisms to say no. And it was like, I guess, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
I mean, they did say yes, you know what I mean? But I wonder what it's like, for someone to be like, no, I'm cool.
Yeah.
And especially at a young age.
Yeah. I mean, I was always the caretaker. I always felt, and this comes down to the structure of my family as well, because my mom was an enabler. So she was such a strong woman, right? She could hold everybody's anger, everybody's hate, everybody's love, everybody's turmoil. So when you watch a woman like that, you believe, oh, I need to step into this woman that I need to hold everything. And that's also not healthy. So for me growing up, it was, okay, I'm a little bit wiser than my years, but also I can hold you. If you're going to drink, somebody has to drive us home, so I'm that person. I'm going to be the one that's going to be the DD and make sure that we all get home safe. I mean, I did try drugs and alcohol when I was younger. I just never had that switch that was like, oh,
I need
I
more of
like this. Right. It was always, oh, I still can have a glass of wine if I want or a drink. But it's not, oh, I need this on a daily basis. It's, oh, I can have a drink every couple weeks.
So in the early years of substance abuse with your parents and your siblings, and living in a small community like that, I'm assuming there's not resources. Were there conversations about one another going, hey, maybe these guys are going too far on this, or maybe we need to reel it back here? Or is it just kind of, let's see what happens?
The rural environment is so hard when it comes to addiction and mental health because there is such a stigma. I mean, people wouldn't let their kids down the street play with me because my dad drank a Bud Light. You know, the stigma it's magnified.
Well, everybody's into everybody's business.
Yes.
And so
that is their business.
Being from a small town.
Yeah,
that's, and it's really cute to this very day. When I talk to my mom, and she still lives in Morgan where I grew up, she and my dad, and it's cute because she'll give me updates on everybody and what they're doing. And it's not gossip, but it's gossipy, you know what I mean? Like but that's in a small town. Everybody knows everybody. I remember being a bagger at the grocery store, the one and only grocery store in town. And if the football game went well the night before, you got pats on the back from all the old timers, and they came through and they knew your name and number. And if you didn't do well, they sat and bent your ear about what you should have done differently. Like everybody knows like what you're doing everywhere you're at, and they're like, you missed that one tackle, and I'm like, well, come on, like 15, man, leave me alone, But you're absolutely right. And so when it comes to things like mental health, substance abuse, any sort of preferred behavior, it gets whispered around, and then there's a lot of that, like, oh, you can't play with those kids, or don't go over to that house, and a lot of families will feel very alienated, and kids can grow up feeling like there's something wrong with me just because my family's different, and that's a really hard stigma to manage.
I grew up in Ogden, and my parents got divorced, and we lived with my mom, and she'd have parties at the house. Mm-hmm. And I heard it more than once from neighbors that our house was called the House of Sin. I'm not.
Gosh, that is so harsh.
But I remember, I remember asking this kid. I was like, "Can you come over to my house?" He goes, "No." I go, "Why?" He goes, "It's the House of Sin." I was like, "What?" He goes, "That's what people are calling your house because your mom works at night, and
so you're unsupervised. And parties happen.
My older brother drank and stuff, and it was the House of Sin." And I was like, "Oh."
Well, how did that make you feel as a kid?
Horrible. Yeah, horrible.
It is
horrible.
It's shameful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, and I remember one time I confronted a guy. Mm-hmm. And said, "You know what? If I hear that out of your mouth again, I will kick the." And
yeah, because it's Ogden.
It was, but
could have happened.
I remember being in 7th grade, going knocking on a grown man's door.
Yeah,
and saying, "Come out here," and I go, because he said some stuff about my mom. Ooh. And I said, if I ever hear another word out of your mouth about my mom, the next time I knock on your door, you're gonna have my fist in your face.
What I love about you, Casey, is you're like the funnest guy I know, but you're a little scary sometimes.
No, and he was like, he goes, whoa, and I go, I think we're done. But I'm telling you now, try me. And I remember I went home and I told my mom, and she said, probably not the best message, but thank you. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it was a lot to carry for a 7th grader.
That is heavy, and and it does.
I just wanted to belong.
Well, it creates a sense of shame, which is one of the most unhealthy things a person can harbor at a young age, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, you're listening to Project Recover. We got more with Holly Jones coming up in just a second. Thank you for stopping by. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Holly Jones, and we were just talking about the stigma that surrounds addiction and mental health in a small town, and I just told you a story about knocking on a neighbor's door when they said some mean things about my mom at my house.
Right.
And I understand the stigma. And Holly, as you were saying, is that the stigma sometimes comes from an honest place. I mean, what they're doing is trying to protect their kids as best they can.
Yeah, I was mentioning that, I think I've done this too. Like, you get scared as a parent, and sometimes we parent out of fear, and that might cause parents to be judgmental, but all the more reason to be talking about this in a public forum to decrease the stigma and to be supportive and inclusive.
Well, here's a story for you. Right out of rehab, I spent 45 days in an inpatient treatment center. And when I got out of rehab and came back to my house, I noticed a couple of things. First and foremost is my lawn was maintained. Mm-hmm. And I remember I called my brothers and I called my mom and I said, hey, did you guys mow my lawn? And they go, no. And I talked to the neighbors, and nobody would tell me who mowed the lawn, but I know it was the neighborhood. Yeah. It was my neighbors coming together and mowing my lawn and maintaining my house while I was trying to get better.
Which seems like a sort of a small chore, but I know how much that meant to you.
Oh, it meant the world to me, and it gave me hope. And the second thing that I was worried about is because I live in a wonderful community. My neighbors are great, and they've been nothing but wonderful towards me and my family. But I thought right out of rehab and with the publicity and the attention and the drinking and driving, I thought my house would be the house with the scarlet A. That kids were, once again, it would be the house of sin. Yeah. And I honestly thought that. I thought, now my kids aren't going to be able to have sleepovers.
Right.
Nobody's going to want to let their kids come over to my house and play because I'm an addict. I'm not going to be in the text thread of who's picking up the kids tonight because everyone's worried. And rightfully so. I mean, I get some of those concerns.
Back to those being a concerned parent.
You know what I mean? And I get those.
And plus, yours was very public.
Yeah. But to my neighborhood, I want to say thank you because they never made me feel like an an outcast. They always welcomed me, and they always did what they could for me and my family. And so I know there's good people out there. And
But partly it's also your kids are awesome.
I'm very fortunate.
Like I think any parent would want your kids around.
But with the stigma of their dad being an addict and being in
Well, they
rehab
want
for 45
you around.
days.
It's the kids, yeah.
So I know there is, but I
Yeah.
understand it in a small town. So let's go back to your family. When did the addiction really start to take hold for your loved ones?
When my two older siblings got a little bit older, and they started figuring out that life happens and they didn't have the coping mechanisms for that life. My father got relieved of his employment at Snow College, and he didn't have the coping mechanisms that he needed. There was also some mental health there that never got dealt with.
Or diagnosed?
No. Yeah, exactly. And people just, they thought, oh no, she's just eccentric. Or, oh no, he's just got a little bit of anger, right? No, these were full-blown mental health issues that needed to be diagnosed when they were a lot younger. They still have not received the care that they need to because of the stigma attached to it. They think, oh no, I'm not going to be that person. What is that person? Somebody who is advocating for their own health? Mm-hmm. That's what we all should do, right? But yeah, so we had some traumas happen in our family, and my dad actually had a surgery where he lost his entire stomach. So it's this man he's 6'1", 200 pounds, and within 6 months he weighed 130 pounds.
Wow.
So for him, it was losing his identity. Mm-hmm. And then also he had just been relieved from an 18-year job where he was very, looked up to. Mm-hmm. He loved his job. And now he lost his identity. We also moved from Sanpete County to the Tooele County area within that time frame. So I think he was just grasping at, who am I and why is this happening to me? Because we were also in another rural area, there weren't the type of resources that he really needed. So when he went down hard. He started using on a daily basis. First, it was pain pills. He was never much of a drinker. And then it turned into, wow, I don't have a stomach anymore. So this large intestine really sucks up that liquor. He could
Mainline it.
Oh, mainline. Yeah, absolutely. So immediately he was a full-blown alcoholic.
Wow.
And that lasted for about 20 years of my life until he unfortunately lost his life from addiction.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's at what age were you when your father passed?
So it's actually only a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So he had some great strides in recovery, and that's why I have such a love for those in recovery, because they find themselves, right? And to watch another human do that, to watch another human come out of such a dark place, and you watch them through that dark place, mm-hmm. and then to see them have hope, and then to fly again. That's the best part about life. I
consider that the real person coming back, right? And so there's different theories on, our mind and our psyche and our spirit and what all those things mean. And one theory that I really like talks about the fact that we have kind of a real, authentic, perfect version of ourselves inside, whatever you want to call that. And through various things in life, whether it's physical health problems, substance abuse, mental health, stress, trauma, that real self gets lost or covered up in different ways. But as we work through all of those things that cover up that real self, we can see and find that real self again. And I think you can see that in no better place than in recovery centers.
Absolutely.
Where that real self comes back to the forefront, and all the loved ones are kind of like, oh, there they are. There's my mom. There's my dad.
I remember my second week in recovery. I'd been there for 14 days and been in detox 7 days prior, so 21 days sober. And I remember on the 14th day or 15th day, I was at the Pinnacle Recovery, and I come walking down the stairs, and the clinical director goes, there you are. And I was like, are you messing with me? I was like, I've been here for 14 days. She goes, no, there you are. There's a light back in your eye. There's a color in your skin. And we were wondering when you were going to come out. And we were just waiting for that.
And that was seeing that real, authentic Casey.
And I remember
Yes.
when I was working for the recovery center and I was tasked with getting new people into the house and helping them find recovery. I remember talking to this person, and right before they went in, I go, I'm kind of envious of you. And I remember the addict looking at me like, you're envious of me. Everything I own is in a duffel bag right now, and I've been living on the streets for 3 days, and you're going to tell me you're envious of me? And I go, because the rebirth you're about to have is amazing. Mm-hmm. It is such a beautiful journey, and so worth it. But I remember him just looking at me like, you are out of here. You might be on drugs, because there's no reason you should be envious of me. And I remember seeing that, and you're 100% correct.
You get excited for them. You're
You're
like,
just like,
oh,
yes.
Yes.
And because they go, life is beautiful.
yes.
And I didn't think that I would ever have a life beautiful again. And now here they are. And it's like watching your child walk for the first time or try ice cream. And you can just see it in their eyes. And they're like, something's amazing's going on there.
There are so many reasons that I'm such an advocate for those in recovery, but that is exactly what you're speaking about right now. The authentic human that they are, their essence, how they emit into all of the energy that we share. That is what our connection is. And to be able to connect with people on such an authentic level, it's a beautiful thing. So I will always support those that are supporting themselves through the recovery.
So you told us a little about your father and his 20-year battle and to his passing. But off air, you said it's been a couple rough years for you.
It has, yeah.
You've lost
4 family members.
to addiction.
Yeah, and that's just the last couple years. Yeah. All to addiction. And mental health. Mental health had a large part of that, undiagnosed, but also the stigma behind it and why people don't reach out for help. And the reason is because we shame them, right? How can we expect those to step into their authentic human selves if we are shaming them for being authentic and not just showering them with love?
You know, I mean, you use the term mental, and it's got a negative connotation right from the get-go. I mean, anytime
we've talked about a lot of centers rename these days and swap out mental for behavioral.
Yes.
And so we even do that at the University of Utah Behavioral Health Clinic. That's where I work, the downtown behavioral health clinic. And I understand that, and I don't mind changing names, but that should just tell you how prevalent and powerful the stigma is if multi-billion-dollar hospital systems are changing names. That's how powerful the stigma is.
And so in the small town you're living in Tooele, I mean, it's growing vastly.
It is,
But they haven't kept up with the resources. I mean, I know they're probably doing the best that they can, or maybe they're not. I would like to think that most communities are doing the best they can.
You can't do the best you can, though, if you don't have the information and if you're not seeking that information about your community. When somebody comes to you and says, hey, we have a huge rate of drug use, you can't say, oh, well, that's what you think, and let's put it under the rug. We'll deal with that on a different day. You have to face it and say, you're right. We do. What can we do?
So recently you were in a meeting, a town meeting. Where
Many.
Yeah, many.
Yes.
So you were just talk about that a little bit, like what it's like when you're trying to talk about the data, trying to talk about the facts, trying to share the knowledge, and what is it like trying to get that through in a small town?
It is very straining, I will tell you. There's been so many times when I felt so defeated walking out of those rooms because I have a lot of knowledge on the subject, and I can't, I can't judge them because they have not had the experience of addiction. I can't. That's where they're at in their life, right?
Sure.
And I'm glad that they haven't had to go through it. But to be able to show up to a meeting and have people stand up, literally stand in the room, 30 of your neighbors stand in the room and say, you will not put this next door to my house because it has somebody with mental health and it has somebody who's on drugs. They actually are not on drugs. They're in recovery. They don't see the difference. They
don't
see it as
see
one.
that neighbors in their community are in their homes on drugs.
Yes.
And driving on the streets on drugs.
Yes.
And
if you want to look
shopping
at
in
the
store
police
on
docket,
drugs.
you can see how many people were admitted for drug-related offenses. If you want to go to the hospitals and see how many people are, those are your neighbors. Those are your friends. Those are your community.
Right.
And so...
So, Casey, what I like about how Holly's talking about this, though, is she's having empathy for the people that are trying to block these things in the community.
Because you only know what you know until you know.
Well, because if I don't have empathy for them, then I'm so angry.
But I also know as a psychologist that just being told something isn't enough to change a mind. Otherwise, my job would just be telling people things, right? and a person has to have open ears, open heart, want to know it, and then know what to do with that information. Like, you have to be ready to receive it. So I'm just curious, from somebody who's done the things you've done, what do you think that key is in a small town to help people not just be informed, because they can dismiss that. They can use repression and denial and excuses and all that stuff. So what do you think the key is to help people really absorb the message of recovery?
Absolutely. That has been in my forethought for months and months. And what I keep coming back to is what you guys just spoke about being authentically them and stepping out and sharing their story. The fact that Casey can do such an amazing thing for those in recovery, and it says so much. I wish everyone that was in recovery could shout it from the rooftops, because then we would know recovery is not only possible, but it's a beautiful thing. And until we can do that, people aren't going to see, because they don't know the dark path that you had to lead to get to this beautiful life. Nobody talks about that.
Well, and I think familiarity is a big part of what you're talking about. And what I mean by that is somebody who I don't relate to could tell me something about their story, and it might be interesting to me, but I'm not sure I'd connect with it. Maybe a person I have very little, if anything, in common with. But what about people from all different walks of life talking to people from their walk of life?
Yes.
So maybe people from the small towns being there at the meetings saying, hey, I'm your neighbor and I want to go to this.
That's the sad part, is I had people there.
Yeah.
And it was so shameful, the things that the other people were saying, that they didn't want to stand up and say. They're like, why do I want to inflict that pain on me? I'm going to get up and walk out, because these people don't understand. And I'm not going to sit here and fight with people that don't want to understand.
And changing minds is a really hard business. Mm-hmm. And it's tough to get people to open their hearts, open their minds, see things differently. But I really appreciate the fact that people like you are willing to go to those meetings and try, because I think it slowly is making a difference.
Yeah. Well, the conversation you guys just had made me think about the past 4 years of doing this podcast. We've had been so blessed with so many people stopping by and sharing their story, but we've had emergency room doctors. Mm-hmm. We've had orthodontists. We've had lawyers, we've had nurses, we've had homeless people, we've had people from all walks of life come on this podcast and share their story. And the amazing thing is at the end, the wonderful things they are doing, what's loving and capable and empathetic people they've become. And it really is. I mean, it's a testament to what's out there in the world of addiction. I mean, it really is. I mean, I look back and I go, we had one guy on here who was an emergency room doctor who would, up at the University of Utah, he would go down and get heroin in downtown Ogden, shoot up and go up there and perform surgery.
Wow. Yeah.
Remember that?
I appreciate that he admitted that.
Yeah.
But honestly, the fact that somebody would admit something like that publicly, that's the powerful message that we need to get out, is that anybody from any walk of life, no matter how educated or respected you are, you can make some terrible decisions when you're in the throes of addiction, and then you can do some beautiful things when you're in recovery. And that we just need to be honest with each other.
We had a guy who owned a construction company on this podcast who was addicted to opioids. He had left his last pill in his ashtray in his truck. He was running to a construction site with his daughter, got out to talk to some employees, came back, noticed the pill was gone.
And she was a young child.
Like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Did the responsible thing and took her straight to the hospital, had her pumped her stomach with charcoal and made sure she was okay. Soon as the doctor told him that she was going to be okay, he said 2 minutes later he was down in the parking lot calling his dealer because that was his last pill.
Yeah.
And now he's been sober for over 6 years and does wonderful things in the world of addiction and recovery. And I was like, and I remember him telling me the story, and I was like, I can't believe you're sharing this.
Isn't that crazy how our brains shift, though, from survival mode?
Yeah.
He was surviving with pills, and then he was surviving as a parent to save his child. Okay, now it's reverting back to my other survival. Pills again.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, there are so many stories that we've heard on this podcast that will just make you drop your jaw, stop and think, oh my gosh, what? This is insane.
Casey, living in a family with a lot of different addicts with a lot of different drugs of choice, I've got some stuff. It's just, you got to work through it.
So have you had any close friends or family members with success stories in recovery that have gotten through?
Yeah. My brother is 8 years sober.
Oh, that's
great. He has an amazing family. He's a single dad of 3. He's doing it every single day, and he's sharing it with others too, which is key.
So you may or may not know this. What's just one of his top things that helped him get into and stay in recovery? Like, what's something he's done or still does?
Top things are definitely not reverting back to old ways, which when you learn new ways, you don't have to revert as much because the path doesn't seem so hard, right?
Well, you've mentioned like traumas popping up in your family and sort of triggering people to use more. So one of the things I found, like, to help people not revert to old ways is once they're in sobriety, then now it's recovery happens when you learn those new ways. So how do I manage my stress?
Yeah.
Because it rains on everybody. Some people figure out how to bring umbrellas. And if you don't have an umbrella, then you feel real desperate, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a big part of helping a person transition from sobriety to recovery is helping them learn to do things differently, manage the stress of, because you're still going to lose a job, you're still going to have to pay taxes,
yes.
You're still going to have a fight with your spouse, and it helps by educating and training people beyond just getting them sober.
Yeah. Number one thing is community, who you are having connections with. Because if you're still having connections with the people that you were doing drugs with, that's where your mind's going to go. It's where your heart's going to go, right? Yeah. Having that community that supports your recovery, but also supports your trials, that's the number one thing. You're not going to not have trials. When you have them, though, who are you picking up the phone and calling? And are you being honest with others that, you know what? No, I'm not perfect. And today sucks. So I can't do X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't mean I'm failing. It means I'm actually doing really well because I told you I'm failing. So please, I need the help.
So before we find out all the cool stuff that you're doing, Tooele, and you've got a lot of stuff coming up that's going to be really a blessing for the community, what advice could you give to people listening to this podcast who have loved ones who are battling addiction? It sounds like
you're going to get me emotional, Casey.
I mean, but I think that's what people would like to hear. I mean, what can you do? Because, through 30 years of family members battling substance, you've had to learn some things.
Yeah. The number one thing is you cannot train somebody or you cannot make them drink the water. They have to want to drink it for themselves. You have to work on you and the ways that you communicate with those family members. There is hope. There is an amazing road to recovery, but you are not the only answer to that road. There's so much enabling that goes on in families with addiction. And until you get help for the things that you are actively doing to contribute to that addiction, those are the things we all get stuck in, is how do I show up every single day and not shame that member or not shame, not remind them or not enable. And some people don't understand what enabling even is because they were taught that's how you love. You take someone's burdens if you love them. No, you don't. You teach them how to live with those burdens, or you connect them to a person who can. Sometimes when we're on the inside, I have 2 family members that I cannot have a conversation with. I can't even have them in my life. I haven't spoken with them for a couple years because they're still in that active mindset of addiction. And no matter how much I love them through it, I'm too close. You have to seek others outside of that sphere. You have to seek the health professionals that are the people that can get them through this. It doesn't say you're not a good family member. It says you are the best family member to give them to someone else to help them. There's so many things, but most of all, I would say there is hope. Just work on you.
And I think that's an important point, is that so many times we do want to take the burdens and we want to take all the hurt from the person that is battling addiction to lighten the load for them. But that's not doing them any good. And what we need to do is figure out what we can do to make ourselves better for when they're ready for recovery, when we can help them and be there. But enabling, still people don't understand what enabling is. They go, well, it helps. Enabling to me is, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, it's the coward way out. For me, enabling is, I'm going to do this for you so I feel like I'm helping and I can sleep better at night.
You know, also, though, I can see that because it's actually a very selfish thing to do because you're trying to get rid of the problem, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing is watching my mother, she was grasping on to a way to survive, like a way to help her child survive.
Yeah. And I get that part of it, too. Yeah, I mean, I do. But to tell somebody to cut them off is going to be the best thing is such a tough thing to do.
Enabling is born out of a lot of desperation and fear and trying to make things better in the moment, right? So a lot of short, quick fixes for problems. I would look at it as after my interaction with this loved one, are they more independent or less independent? Are they more dependent on me or less dependent on me? Like, do they have their more ability to manage their life or less ability because I'm doing it for them? If the answer is the latter and they're more dependent on you, you might need to reconsider whether or not you're enabling.
Good.
It is. And it's actually that person's own problem that they need to be seeking help for, right?
Right.
Like it all comes from their own issues as well. So
what cool things are you doing in Tooele right now? How are you going to help the recovery community?
we're doing so many cool things. Casey, we are so excited. So we have two companies. One is called the Beacon House. The Beacon House is it's an inpatient residential treatment facility for men and women, and also a sober living community. So my background a little bit is I'm a real estate developer, and so I'm trying to find ways to give back to the community. So I'm finding these projects where, we have a 12-plex that we're going to build, and that's where they graduate after group living. And group living is where they graduate out of inpatient. So it's not like a quick fix. None of this is a quick fix, but it has to all communicate together. So say a family member enters into one of our in treatment, they would graduate into intensive outpatient, and then they would live in a group living environment. There are so many key features to group living environment. There's community. There's
accountability.
Accountability is huge, yes. But it's people within your own house building you up and keeping that energy and saying, no, I'm calling you out on this, right? Mm-hmm. And they need that. If you go into inpatient, it's so hard to just go back to your normal environment. It's, we have a 2 out of 10 success rate, and that's a good success rate in Utah.
That seems a little high.
That is, yes. And that's with all of the right things. So for us, it's just a way to give back to the resources that we need there. But we're working with a lot of amazing professionals that have been fighting this fight out there for about 8 years. Bonneville Family Practice, they do an incredible job at outpatient therapy. They also have MAT treatments, it's medical assisted therapies that they help as well, and mental health. So the Beacon House has inpatient, they have outpatient. Sober living environments all the way up to independent living. So can you imagine living in an apartment complex where everybody is sober because they're all doing the work? To be able to create those type of communities are huge.
Man, that is really cool because what we know in mental health and substance abuse, recidivism rates are huge. People, circle in and out of these treatment centers because of relapse all the time.
By her numbers, it would be 80%.
Yeah, it's actually a little higher, I think, overall. But that's discouraging. But as places like this help support people through this process beyond just their inpatient treatment, then they start to put more weeks and months and even years under their belt, and like you said earlier, the key is community, and that's what you're building.
Yes.
Sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know who came up with this, but this guy should get punched in the face. The 30-day fix for recovery.
Yeah.
Because you talk to most addicts, or addicts and loved ones of addicts, they were like, well, 30 days and it's going to be good. No, that's just scratching the surface. 30 days is just to get you off of the drugs and get you in somewhat of a a safe place. But then there's so
It's
much
just
work that goes on.
That's just a step in the right direction.
But you talk to anybody, and even when I was on the front lines trying to get people in, they go, 30 days is all I'm going to give you. And I was like, well,
that's
okay. I mean, we'll take it, but it's so much more than just 30 days.
Oh, it is. It's a lifetime, and you have to start building those relationships that they can lean on for that.
Well, and I would imagine you've experienced this in your family where people go in, get some treatment, but then they come right back to not just friends, but family members who are also using that. It's the same environment, same stressors, nothing's really changed. Why would we expect that they could handle it better?
It's so true. And the biggest part is this is a family disease. This
100%.
is not one person. We think, oh, we're going to send that one person into treatment. What is the other parts of the family doing during that 30 days? During that 30 days when your loved one is inpatient trying to get their medical survival skills back, what are you doing as a family? Because if they come back to the exact same environment, nothing's going to change. You have to change every single piece of that family for it to be successful.
So in the Tooele community where you work, if a family member has a loved one going into treatment, what would you recommend they do?
So we have a family group sessions that are mandatory for everybody that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
We advocate for families so much. And if your loved one is not ready, if they are not ready for treatment yet, and you still want to make a step in the right direction, please contact us. Because just because your loved one isn't ready, you are ready.
And
Because
there's
because it's a
Al-Anon.
family disease,
Yeah, but-
it's traumatic for. I can't imagine being a parent watching your child go through addiction. I would need help. I would need support, but I probably wouldn't know where to go.
And that's why there's great programs like Al-Anon, which is,
Yes.
is a wonderful resource for loved ones of addicts.
And there's the CRAFT program. We've
Yep.
had representatives come on and talk
Yep.
about that. So,
Well, I'm excited and I can't wait. And when you're all up and running, we'll have you back on to talk about it because this podcast is all about recovery and everything you're doing screams recovery, and I love it. Dr. Matt, last thoughts about Holly Jones.
What about Holly Jones? I was going to say, I think this is the Casey Scott punch you in the face episode. That's come up a couple times today. Yeah, you're on fire.
I'm sorry.
You're on fire. No, I being a small town person myself, having an uncle who eventually passed from alcoholism and was part of that small town community, it's near and dear to my heart to try to support people in small towns. I also know that changing minds anywhere is tough business, but small towns for sure. I think a lot of the mistakes we make in life are born out of fear and ignorance. And so when people can come in and reduce the fear, make connections, share information to reduce ignorance, eventually, it's a slow grind, but I know people like you are going to make a difference in small towns. And we often think of addiction, and I think in the past it's been highlighted in the urban areas and big cities. But the reality is small towns, they struggle so much, not just with the same addictions, but frankly, because they don't have the same resources. So thank you for what you're doing.
And I think addiction and cops have a lot in common where people like to bag on them until they need one.
Until they need them.
You know what I mean? So you got
Yeah.
you got cops and you got resource centers, and everybody wants to,
You'll be like, I don't want that around me until you need
one.
it. Yeah.
And then you're going, well, why isn't there more around here?
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much. We appreciate you stopping by, and we look forward to your success and all that you're doing for the recovery community. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And you've been listening to Project Recovery. And in case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
Casey punch in the face, Scott. It's a KSL podcast.
I was going to say punch in the face, but now I won't.